character and concept of Cable originated in the early 1990s, with the gritty Bronze Age of comics and leftover aspects of gun-toting, pouch-wearing, beard stubble growing, masculine heroes of the 1980s. 1990s artist Rob Liefeld is responsible for most of the character's original aspects, such as appearance, name, design, original personality, and other co-creators such as Bob Harris and Louise Simonson suggested other names for the character like Quinn and Commander X, which were edgy, eerie, and mysterious, which was the thought at the time. Cable would come to represent the extreme aspects of the early and mid-1990s Uncanny X-Men comic books, alongside Bishop, who was also another breakout character of the early 1990s. The character, which did not have much fan praise early because of the confusing aspects surrounding the character, but in time would become well respected among the X-Men characters community through the years, and the character's developmental evolution by many writers is one of the few examples of modern progressionism on character development in Marvel Comics. Nathan Christopher Charles Summers. First appearance as Nathan Summers, Uncanny X-Men issue 201, January 1986. First appearance as Cable, The New Mutants, issue 87, March 1990. Cable's origin is very complex and detailed. Nathan's birth was carefully and methodically planned by a villain of the X-Men, Mr. Sinister. Through circumstances and storylines, Jean Grey, the love of Scott Summers and host of the Phoenix Force, was presumed dead. Grieving from her loss, he decided to take time away from the X-Men team to reassess his life. During this time, he ventured to Alaska, and Sinister actually created a clone of Jean Grey, and this clone was named Madeline Pryor. Sinister arranged for her to meet Scott, and he was instantly infatuated with the woman whom resembled Jean so much. Through more circumstances, the pair actually married, and Madeline became pregnant and bore a son. Scott named this son after some of the most influential and fatherly figures in his life, his name of Christopher coming from his birth father, the vigilante hero Corsair, and Charles from Professor Charles Xavier. After the birth of Nathan, Scott and Madeline decided to move to Anchorage in order to raise Nathan. However, the life of seclusion was short as Angel arrived and informed Scott that Jean was alive and had returned. Angel asked Cyclops to return and lead a new team of mutants called X-Factor, which comprised of members of the original X-Men team. The quiet solitude of Anchorage, as well as the dull life he now lived, combined with the fact that the woman he loved for most of his life, Jean, was now alive, was actually enough for him to essentially abandon Madeline and Nathan as he soon returned to New York to lead the new team. With Madeline and Nathan now alone, Sinister decided that this would be the time to abduct the child, as it was revealed that the reason why Sinister cloned Jean Grey was that he hypothesized that a child of Cyclops and Phoenix would theoretically be strong enough to kill the mutant apocalypse. But with Jean assumed dead, the clone of Madeline was needed for Sinister's plans as a substitute for Jean. Now that Jean was alive, he feared that if Jean were to ever meet Madeline, she'd be exposed as a clone and Sinister's plans would be put into jeopardy. Deciding that Madeline was now a liability to him, he sent the villain team of the Marauders to kill her. Though Madeline survived the assassination attempt, Mr. Sinister erased all records and documentation of her and the child's existence. Obtaining the infant, he returned to a secret laboratory complex within an underground facility in Nebraska. Here he would not only experiment on Nathan, but study and perform research on other abducted mutant babies. Soon after Scott got established with X-Factor, he began to have thoughts of Madeline and Nathan, and decided to give them a call to see how they were doing. When he couldn't reach her, he assumed that she simply had moved away with the baby. But looking into things further, he couldn't find any trace of her. He learned that through uncanny X-Men events, the team seemingly died in Dallas. Live on national television, Madeline was with the team. With Madeline seemingly dead, Scott didn't know where to start looking for his son. Circumstances had him venture to Sinister's hideout in Nebraska. Attempting to save Nathan with Jean, the infant was stolen by a group of demons, as well as the other mutant babies. Connecting to the X-Men event Inferno, Madeline Pryor was revealed to be alive and driven insane by the fact that she was nothing more than a clone of Jean Grey. Calling herself the Goblin Queen, she was so vile now that she had attempted to use Nathan's own life as a source of power to increase her own abilities. Through circumstances and the combined strength of the X-Men and X-Factor teams, they were able to save Nathan and the other babies, and Madeline committed suicide through events. Scott and Jean later cared for the child, whom actually started to show telepathic powers reminiscent of Jean, and remained in the care of X-Factor until he was kidnapped by Apocalypse. The mutant used some of Nathan's own latent abilities to increase his own power, as X-Factor launched the rescue of the child. During the confrontation between Apocalypse and his forces, a woman by the name of Ascani appeared to Cyclops and claimed that she was from the distant future. In a display of what she had said, she stopped Beast from attempting to remove Nathan from a device that would have actually killed him instantaneously. However, the device emitted a pulse that affected Ascani's time-traveling technology. She could still travel, but not safely anymore. Cyclops destroyed Apocalypse, and Nathan was released. However, the boy was infected by the infamous techno-organic virus that now threatened his life. Ascani told Cyclops and Marvel Girl that the virus was fatal in their current timeline, and that the only way to save him was for her to bring him back to the future to save his own life with the technology present in that future time period. Essentially, the only thing that Cyclops could do now is send Nathan into the far future and never see him again, or let him die by the virus now. After a heart-wrenching struggle, Cyclops decided to let Ascani take him to the future to save his life. When Ascani arrived in her own timeline of the distant future, she knew that traveling through the timeline would mean her own life, and gave Nathan to her people before dissolving into nothingness. Soon put into an incubation chamber, Ascani's clone scientists and professionals scanned Nathan for the virus and soon began treatment on him. The leader of the clone, through events, was actually Rachel Summers, Nathan's sister from an alternate timeline, the Days of Future Past incident. The virus was particularly strong within Nathan, and Mother Ascani, Rachel's name in this future timeline, ordered a genetic clone to be created in case the treatments of their own time could not work and Nathan died anyway from the virus. Thankfully, Nathan's condition with the virus stabilized and the clone wasn't actually needed. Though Apocalypse's forces attacked the Ascani stronghold and stole the Cable clone for his own uses, Mother Ascani had intentions to destroy Apocalypse and actually grew two bodies in the stronghold from organic matter collected from Cyclops and Phoenix's descendants. Just before the attack, the Ascani brought the minds of Scott and Jean into the future timeline to raise Nathan. She mentioned that they would have dual aliases of Slim and Red and spend the next few years raising Nathan and actually living quite a peaceful and simple life. During this time, Apocalypse raised the Nathan clone with the eventual intention of transferring his own intelligence into it, as Apocalypse did this through the thousands of years of his life. The clone of Nathan was named Stryfe by Apocalypse. As years and circumstances passed, Nathan, Slim, and Red were able to finally destroy Apocalypse and his evil. With Stryfe also defeated and in rehabilitation, and Mother Ascani, Rachel in old age, finally dying, the minds of Scott and Jean were pulled back into their own current timeline, and Nathan was left all alone. After Apocalypse's death, a group took control of what was left of the government and installed a dictatorship. Finding new friends and allies, Nathan continued to fight the good fight and make the world a more peaceful place. The rehabilitation of Stryfe had not worked as well as Nathan had hoped, and those around him began to fall under his control. Further after the death of Apocalypse, Nathan was now called Dayspring. In this time, him and a friend of his were arrested for rebellious thoughts and actions. While imprisoned, he learned the ways of the Ascani. Through the decades, Dayspring became more experienced as a warrior, as well as Stryfe gathered more followers and power for his own ambitions, eventually wearing full armor and a helmet so that Dayspring was never able to see his foes. Factions came and gone, and much of Dayspring's life at this time was constant warfare. He grew tired of the future political factions and constant conflict in the 4th millennium, and time traveled back thousands of years to the dawn of civilization and became a vagrant. Eventually, he leapt through different points in history, gaining further experience as a fighter and became known as the Traveler. Deciding to return later on to the future, he took the alias of Cable for the first time, and a woman rather close to him took the alias of Jen Scott. Learning that the fighting has not stopped between the various factions in the future, he had no choice but to continue fighting. One of the people fighting the war was a man by the name of John Spector, who was hinted at having a child with Jen Scott. This son was Tyler Dayspring. Writing had conflicting statements as to when exactly Tyler was born, or if he was the son of Nathan and Jen Scott, or John and Jen Scott. Tyler, not having seen the brutality of war and fighting, made it difficult for him at times to get along with Nathan. An ambush by the forces loyal to Stryfe left Jen Scott dead and Tyler in Stryfe's possession. Through more circumstances, Nathan decided that the only way to truly end the madness was to find Professor Xavier of the X-Men and explain the situation to him. Nathan mentioned once that Cable was a reference to the past and future, and reason for taking that name as him being a link that can tie and hold things together, as he often felt and believed that he did that in life. Founding a mercenary group known as the Wild Pack with different members, one of which was Domino, who would do various jobs and occasionally travel through time to and from his spaceship, the Greymalkin. In this ship was the intelligence program system that he used, called the Professor, and this time displacement core which helped him and controlled his trips through time. Ironically, at one point in time, the Wild Pack group was forced to change their name for copyright reasons, as Silver Sable's own team actually used the same name. Inspired by a pack of soda cans, they came up with the alias of Six Pack instead. The team soon began to take assignments from a client by the name of Mr. Tolliver, who was actually Tyler in disguise, after coming back from the Ascani future himself. After later setting up an encounter in Russia, Tyler, under the alias of Mr. Tolliver, had Cable and Stryfe meet in the current timeline for the first time. Though the Six-Pack members weren't up for fighting because they would not get paid for it, Cable convinced them to do so. However, circumstances had them leave, and later on there would be a climactic final battle between Stryfe, Cable, and the Six-Pack. It was disastrous for the team, and they were all either crippled, killed, or maimed during the battle except for Domino. After this incident, Cable severed ties with all of his former teammates. After the fallout with Six-Pack, Cable continued to operate in the current Marvel timeline and actually did freelance work for the United States government. Due to murky circumstances fell out of their favor and became a wanted man. Not much is known about Cable's life at this time, as he made again his presence known by investigating Stryfe's new faction, the Mutant Liberation Front. Through circumstances, he would have been captured by the Front if it was not for the intervention of the New Mutants. Deciding that he could possibly use his children as his soldiers against Stryfe, he then agreed to train them and assume command of the New Mutants team with the approval of X-Factor and Moira McTaggart. The new mutants adapted well to the circumstances and situations that Cable put them through. Each and every one of them became a more and skilled fighter. After the Extinction Agenda, which was an event within the comics with Stryfe, some of the new mutant members left. Those who remained, as well as Domino and some new allies, created a group called X-Force. The new mutants had remained beneath the ruins of Professor X's mansion, but soon relocated to an old Sentinel manufacturing base in the Adirondack mountain range. Nathan used the team as an attacking force against the Mutant Liberation Front, Black Tom and the Juggernaut, or the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. A combined force including S.H.I.E.L.D. and a Department K, which was Weapon Prime for the purpose of bringing Cable to justice to account for his past incidents. Some of these members were former teammates of Nathan's. Added to this, Domino was revealed to be the shape-shifting copycat working for Tolliver. Cable was separated from X-Force during an assault by Prime, an explosive set by Tolliver. Forcing Copycat to take him to Tolliver's hideout, he found that the real Domino was alive but chained and bound, with Copycat being surprised that she was still alive after all that had happened. Domino had been impersonated and imprisoned for at least a year by that point in time. During a confrontation with Tolliver, he attempted to escape by helicopter, but Cable jumped on board and set it on fire. Body sliding, which was his reference of teleporting away from the explosion, he failed to see that Tolliver's clothes and a latex face mask in the ocean. Afterwards, this was a sign that Tolliver had survived. Soon after, Stryfe made an assassination attempt on Charles Xavier and infected him with another techno-organic virus, without his helmet on to confuse others and at the same time to frame Cable for the crime. At the exact same moment, Scott and Jean were kidnapped, and with Nathan returning from his trip for the future, he found out that he was wanted not only by S.H.I.E.L.D., Department K, Mr. Tolliver, the Mutant Liberation Front, and the various X-teams. Cable decided to infiltrate the MLF's headquarters seeking information and came across Wolverine and Bishop doing the same thing. After a slight misunderstanding, Cable was able to explain the situation to Wolverine and Bishop and concluded that Stryfe's headquarters was on the moon. And alongside a team of X-Men and even Apocalypse, through circumstances, they fought through Stryfe's forces. Through the intense battle, Cable alongside Polaris and Havoc made their way further out to a smaller secondary base that Stryfe had retreated to. Only those of a summer genetic code could make their way inside. Cable, being the son of Cyclops, and Havoc, being his brother of Cyclops as well, were allowed in. Freeing Scott and Jean, Cable and Stryfe fought each other at last and revealed the information to everyone that had been secret for so long, that Cable was the time-displaced son of Scott and Madeline, and that he was the damaged clone of Cable. Nathan triggered an explosion that forced both of them into a time portal. In the final climactic struggle, it was thought that both had died as a result. However, both survived the battle, but Stryfe's body had been destroyed, though his personality remained in the back of Nathan's mind. Through more circumstances, Cable then made up with an old acquaintance of his, Garrison Kane. Time traveling once more, he and Kane searched for the time displacement core of his space station, but it was at the bottom of the ocean. Upon retrieving and further body slides, he met up with some of the old members of the Six-Pack team. Even though both had memories of old times, they all decided to go their own ways without him. While visiting the grave of his mother, Madeline Pryor Summers, Cable and Domino would be confronted by Mr. Sinister. There, he provided further information spoken about by Stryfe about his origin, identity, and purpose, most of which was not actually known to Cable himself. Through the situation with Stryfe on the moon base incident, which was the Executioner's Song event, Nathan learned the truth of himself. Stryfe had mentioned to Cable that he was the real son of Scott and Madeline, and Cable was the clone, but the truth was in fact reverse. Also, the fact that he was born as a living weapon to confront Apocalypse, and the fact that Mr. Tolliver was in fact Nathan's adopted son of Tyler Dayspring. Leaving Cable and Domino, the stress of all this news caused Stryfe's personality to re-emerge and gain physical control of Cable's body. With more circumstances, the Stryfe-possessed Cable learned about the fact that he was the clone and Nathan was the real son of Scott and Madeline Jean. This made him further enraged. Tracking down and confronting Tyler, they argued and had a fight. Jean, Scott, and Domino all convinced Stryfe to let it all go and to finally rest in peace, which he did. With his mind free, Cable was himself again. During all this, Tyler had escaped. During an incident with foes, they had gained mental control over Cannonball and a few other mutants and convinced them, forced them into fighting Cable. Not wanting to harm Cannonball, he focused the most he had in years and used his own telepathic powers to stop. This was one of the few times that Cable had used his weak psionic powers on others. Later, the various X-teams would be attacked by the Phalanx, a techno-organic race of aliens. One of them infiltrated X-Force's base, where it tried to assimilate the computer, and it was defeated by the Professor, Cable's computer system. Through all of the adventures and situations together, Cable and Domino actually considered becoming more than friends. Cable casually mentioned if she wanted to go out on a date. She accepted, and both were taken aback by it. Something more could have come out of it, but Cable made frequent references to facts and things that he shared not with Domino, but with Copycat. Dealing with events further through time travel, Cable learned that through events and the confusion with Stryfe, Tyler Dayspring had went completely mad and assumed the alias of Genesis, and caused great chaos in the future. Seeking to harness the powers of Apocalypse, Cable had no choice but to kill Tyler, his adopted son, as this had once again reminded him about how lonely and depressing his life can be at times. Shortly after, an energy wave from the M-Cron crystal was about to destroy and remake reality, leaving the various X-teams 1 hour for last rites. Taking time out to reveal to Nathan, Scott and Jean mentioned that they had mentally raised him in the future as Slim and Red Dayspring. Though he sort of knew it, he was glad that he was able to obtain some peace with his parents finally. With the wave about to reach Earth, Cable and Domino shared a deep kiss, but the destruction turned out to be temporary. This is what caused the Age of Apocalypse series in the mid-1990s. After the Age of Apocalypse, Cable would be informed that there was a psionic signature identical to his own that had become active on Earth. Assuming and fearing the return of Stryfe, Cable tracked down this signature and for the first time met his double, Nate Gray, who had crossed over from the Age of Apocalypse reality. Having been created from that reality, Scott and Jean's DNA by Mr. Sinister, it was the exact same as Nathan's origin, but he did not have the techno-organic virus to hamper his psionic powers. And as a result of this, Nathan was extremely skilled with telepathy. The two same beings from alternate timelines being within the direct vicinity of each other caused the time paradox, and soon both were in excruciating pain mentally and physically. Nate blamed Cable for the pain and started a fight with him. Exodus, the adopted son of Apocalypse from the AOA timeline, used this as a moment to attack the both of them. Through the situation, Cable was able to stop Nate and actually save his life using his own psychic powers. But due to him rarely using such powers throughout his life, it left him seriously weakened and his techno-organic virus resurged throughout his body. Due to the events in the Onslaught crossover, Nathan's techno-organic virus almost consumed him, but with help from his friends and allies, the virus was kept in check so that it was not a threat to his life any more than usual. With the aftershocks from Onslaught, Cable sought to find the members of X-Force and have them go into hiding due to the new mutant backlash against them, but they refused, wanting to find their own way without Cable, and as a result, Cable was forced to formally and officially leave the team for good. After more adventures, Cable found himself dealing with the Shadow King and Psylocke. As a result of this interaction, telepathic powers were temporarily negated on a global scale. The limited telepathy that he had was now gone, so an old friend, his mentor, Blacksmith, who had helped him many times, offered further assistance. Later arriving in Greece, he obtained a scimitar lance. This weapon would be one of Cable's most visible weapons for the late 1990s. With events relating to the 12 X-Men event, Rachel Summers traveled back in time to put the identities of who the 12 were with Cable. Through circumstances, the new rise of Apocalypse couldn't be stopped, with Apocalypse's new horsemen trying to assemble the 12 members to revive Apocalypse. Cable and the X-Men traveled to Egypt to attempt to prevent this from occurring. Through events, most of the X-Men were captured, the 12 who were prophesied to be needed to fully revive Apocalypse. Nate Gray was supposed to be the new vessel to house Apocalypse's vast energies, but the 12 escaped before the transfer was complete, and Cyclops sacrificed his body to keep Apocalypse's essence from being transferred to Nate. With Cyclops apparently dying in the battle and the new Apocalypse escaping, Cable felt guilty that he was not able to prevent such an outcome from occurring. Further along, the X-Men learned that someone was planning to assassinate Senator Robert Kelly. Cable was put into Kelly's support staff to keep an eye on him and to protect him from assassination, as his death was supposed to start the Days of the Future Past timeline events. However, Cable was not actually able to save the Senator from assassination because it wasn't a mutant who killed the Senator, but a fanatical human who was upset that he had changed his position on mutants in American governmental policy. Though the death did not change events, another death also hit the X-Men and its consequences was even worse. Moira McTaggart died from injuries sustained by the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Nathan took her death personally because she was among the first to welcome him into the 20th century. Questioning his position with the X-Men, Storm mentioned to Nathan that he would always be welcome when he returned. Cable soon received word that the essence of Apocalypse was still in existence as well as the possessed Scott Summers. Nathan, along with Jean, tracked down the quote-unquote Cyclopolis and had one truly final battle. Pierced by a scimitar weapon, Apocalypse was truly dead. Cable had now finally fulfilled his true purpose as created and orchestrated by Mr. Sinister as the one to kill Apocalypse, and even saved his father's life in the process. With Apocalypse finally dead, Nathan soon sought a new purpose in life. Remembering what he was best at, Cable became a one-man army unit, traveling the world and changing things, one conflict at a time. Discovering a cure for the legacy virus, this would actually help him with his own techno-organic virus. Isolating it within him, he actually extracted it from his own body. Apparently, the techno-organic virus had been keeping his own psionic powers under control, and after a life of not trading or hardly ever using it, his abilities proved almost fatal to him. His own desire to help save the world by becoming a one-man army proved actually to be useless, as he couldn't save a young mutant girl who was executed for her parents' murders. With the techno-organic virus now fully under his control, his psionic powers began to increase, and he soon re-established a new team with Domino, Blacksmith, and others. His telepathic powers, he believed, would someday overcome him and naturally kill him as a result of this, so he thought of how he could best serve the world before his eventual death. Learning that a bioweapon called the Facade virus was being developed in Germany, and that the virus would be later tested on humans, Cable soon decided that he had to head there to destroy it, but would only run into the mercenary Deadpool who wanted the virus for another party interested in its potential. Cable managed to get a sample of the virus by extracting it out of a body of an infected person on a molecular level. Forced to retreat, Deadpool would soon encounter Cable again, but through circumstances, both would be infected by the virus. Even Deadpool's hyperimmune system wasn't enough to actually help him eliminate the virus from his body, and both were laying dying as a result. Cable telepathically absorbed a good amount of the virus into his own body, and Deadpool was able to heal himself. Nathan's techno-organic virus soon got back under his control, and he actually maintained a fraction of Deadpool's healing factor. The whole Cable and Deadpool comic was actually a surprising success, as the pair was one of the most widely known and read comics of the X-Men in the early to mid 2000s. The pair would have many adventures and become unlikely friends. The duo would remain together until the Civil War comic event split them apart due to their views during the event. But the concept of the two anti-heroes is now considered one of the best editorial decisions that Marvel made at the time. The technological organic virus. The virus that came to define the Cable character actually has two variants. The one that's made up by the Technoarchy, which is an alien race, and another which was discovered or created by Apocalypse. The Technoarchy actually calls it the transmode virus, which they use to transform other beings into techno-organic beings like themselves. The Technoarchy can then feed upon the infected beings and drain their life essence, as displayed by invisible lights flowing through the infected being. Once all available or useful energy is used, the host is then left as a brittle statue. If an infected creature is not drained of their energy, the creature then becomes a phalanx. Infected beings are known by being a striking black and yellow appearance. Infected beings can transmit the virus. The said virus is extraordinarily contagious and can infect a non-techno creature within seconds. A few mutants have possessed high resistance to the virus, such as Cypher, Warlock, and Wolverine. Now, these beings cannot actually resist the virus, however, they can slow down the rate of which they are being assimilated by. Higher resistance, essentially. An infected being can also shapeshift due to them being infected. The Phalanx are considered abominations and a subgroup within the Technoarchy. Instead of usually being infected and siphoned for their energy, they can also create an energy spire to contact the Technoarchy to assimilate the said planet. Eventually, they assimilate the entire planet into itself and drain all possible energy within it. The variant that Cable is infected with is believed to have been created by Apocalypse or discovered by him on board the ship. One account has this variant being created by Mr. Sinister as a method for killing Apocalypse. This attempt failed due to Apocalypse's vast powers, and the virus became a weapon of his, as he then later used this virus to infect the infant Nathan Summers. The original character concept for Cable. Cable has had a long and confusing character history. It's now known that most, if not all of his Ascani stories were written as filler to plug in the gigantic story holes within his life and other interactions with characters. What's interesting is that some of these gaps are there because Cable was originally intended to be someone else, and that Cable was not intended to be the adult Nathan Summers or anything related to Nathan Summers. As mentioned, when Cable was first introduced, he was intended to be a mysterious gun-wielding vigilante that reflected the times in American comic books. A time traveler with his own agenda, and even more information about his time traveling wouldn't be discussed for an extended period after, which as a result had confusing aspects with the character. The writers at the time had an idea for someone to be drastically new and different, and to have a serious military background. The idea was suggested by X-Men editor at the time, Bob Harris, to even have the character with a bionic eye for a difference as well. Simonson and Layfield both had similar ideas of a time-traveling soldier, and the ideas were pitched. Eventually, the concept of Cable was presented, and they now wanted Cable to have an equally striking and mysterious villain. Stryfe also debuted in the same issue that Cable did. Cable was known as the time traveler from the future, but as to who Stryfe was, that was supposed to be even more mysterious, more tension, and more unknown questions than Cable himself. One pitched by Layfield was that, for even more of a twist, that Stryfe was to be a woman under all that thick armor. However, it was ultimately decided that Stryfe would be Cable, as this was to be the big revelation. The original concept was that since Cable was a time traveler, no one would know that when we would see Cable in his own timeline, or current timeline, who was who. Was Stryfe Cable in the present, then repent his ways and become Cable, or some other approach? Stryfe was intended to be the younger version of Cable, so that we would have likely saw him descend into chaos and madness within himself and become the villain of his own younger self. The idea seemed original and different at the time. This approach would change as other writers and artists connected to the X-Men comics at the time soon had their own ideas and intentions for Cable. Jim Lee, Bob Harris, and Willis Portacio, without discussing it with Rob Liefeld, decided that Nathan Summers, the son of Scott Summers and Madeline Pryor, was going to be sent into the future and eventually grow up to become Cable. Liefeld didn't like this fact at all, but had no choice but to go along with it. Still deciding with Fabian Nicieza, another writer on the New Mutants comic, agreed that Stryfe can still be as Cable, but it would be made that Cable was a clone of Nathan Summers and that Stryfe was the real Nathan Summers. Another concept is that Ahab, another X-Men villain at the time, was intended to be an alternate or future version of Cable. It's very hard to say, as the said story was written by X-Men master writer Chris Claremont, who never really had any interactions with the early Cable. Mentioned by Nicieza that it was supposed to be a spontaneous idea mentioned by Harris, and that he thought it would be interesting, so Claremont slipped the comment in. Either it was or was not, there was not much else to go on from there. Another concept is that Cable is the older version of Cannonball that came back from the future, a very prominent and well-known theory among more experienced X-Men readers. Again, it has to do with the early concepts of Cable and the mystery around him. There are facts of truth with this, as Liefeld did consider the idea, but Simonson never really desired for Cable to be an older version of Cannonball. With everything now known about the time traveler Cable known as Nathan Summers, what do viewers and listeners think of the character and his concepts?